Good afternoon, and welcome to episode 4 of Duval Rundown, presented by Injury Care Centers. Your path to recovery starts here. My name is Gus Logue, your host for the show. I'm very excited about our guest for today, but first, as always, we're going to start out with some trivia. Trayon Walker recorded his second career game with multiple sacks in Week 1 against the Miami Dolphins. Who did his first multiple sack game come against? Was it A, the Indianapolis Colts, B, the Buffalo Bills, C, Kansas City Chiefs, or D, the Carolina Panthers? Give a couple seconds for people to think. And the correct answer is D. Last year against the Carolina Panthers, Trayon Walker had a 2-sack performance. So obviously it's nice to see Trayon starting off the season hot. But unfortunately, the Jaguars as a whole did not start the season hot. They started out 0-1 in Miami. And here to break down the game with me is Dave Campo, former Dallas Cowboys head coach, former Jacksonville Jaguars assistant head coach. Used to coach for the Cuse and for the Canes. He's got a lot of expertise to bring to the show, so I'm super excited to bring him on board. Welcome, Coach Campo. How are you doing today?
I'm good, Dust. How you doing?
I'm great. I mean, we were talking before the show. I think we were both a little bit flustered after the game on Sunday, but we've had a little bit of time to kind of cool our jets and kind of just look back on what did occur on Sunday. And so I wanted to start by talking to you about what exactly happened on Jalen Waddle's long reception in the third quarter. I believe it went for 62 yards. And so it's a little bit hard to kind of tell who is to blame for that broken play because the Jags were running a too high safety coverage, and Antonio Johnson was one of the safeties, and he kind of dropped down to defend a dig by Tyreek Hill, and him dropping down allowed Jalen Waddle to kind of come over the top of him, and Andre Cisco wasn't able to kind of keep pace from that other safety position. And so, Coach, just what did you see on that play? Is it more of Johnson's assignment to cover that half of the field and just whatever's the deepest route? Or do you think Cisco should have carried Waddle across the field? What are your thoughts?
Well, there's a couple things on that. First of all, you have to give Miami a little credit because it was a play action pass, which does two things. Number one, it controls the rush and the linebackers, okay? Mm-hmm. And it also is a situation where when you run one of those, the problem with a true play action pass is if you're faking the ball to the running back, it slows you down as well as not seeing the field. But the other thing it did was it became maximum protection. That was a two-man route. It was a dig or a crossing route by Tyreek Hill and Waddle over the top, as you mentioned earlier. The thing that they did a great job with was they faked the toss sweep. Now, there wasn't any delay at all on the quarterback because he just faked the toss and his eyes were downfield immediately. His eyes could see what was happening. But the control of the linebackers and the maximum protection, there was nobody near him. So he had all day to wait for whatever route was going to open. The dig was open because of no drop underneath by the linebackers. It was a too deep coverage, so the linebacker has to get underneath that route. It looked wide open to Hill, and Antonio Johnson, being a rookie, wow, this guy's wide open. I got to do something. Well, no, he doesn't. You want him to hit the dig. You don't want the post over the top. Right. So he dropped down on the route. There was no shot of Cisco being able to run with Waddle across the field for the 62 yards. The good thing about it was a big play, but it was mitigated by making the tackle. That's the big part of it. There's going to be big plays in games, but the real big plays are the ones that go all the way for the touchdown. You don't make a tackle on a guy.
Absolutely. I think PFF charted the Jaguars for having 14 missed tackles on Sunday. And so obviously, it was a pretty good performance as a whole by the Jaguars defense going against a great offensive speed that threatens defenses, not just vertically, but also horizontally, like we saw with the Achain screen that went for 39 yards in the first quarter. But before we get to that, the other really big explosive play was Tyreek Hill's 80-yard touchdown. So what did you see on that one, Coach?
Well, again, you have to give them credit because they went back to that play. It's the exact same play, the exact same situation, on an early down, but it was this time Waddle running the dig and Hill running the post over the top. And the Jags were in a different coverage. They were in now a man-to-man coverage, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So you had the center fielder in Cisco. I would have thought Cisco would have been a little bit quicker on the drive on the football on that one because of the maximum protection and the control of the linebackers. The only two people that were able to make a play on that play was Darby covering him one-on-one and the free safety being over the top. So Tua had all day to wait for Hill to get all the way across the field, and it was a speed mismatch between Hill and Darby. And then here's the problem. He makes the catch. We then try to make the tackle, and Cisco undercuts him and misses the tackle, and the guy goes 80 yards for a touchdown. So both of those situations, while being the same, the difference is the first one was mitigated by making the tackle, and they did not score on that drive. And one that goes 80 yards because we don't, number one, we didn't have as many people closing on the tackle because it was man-to-man and the other guys were covered up. So it's just a shame. The unfortunate thing is it came right after the fumble, which, obviously changed the momentum of the game completely.
Right. Yeah, I actually thought Darby stuck as well as he could have with Hill on that one, but then Cisco, as you said, kind of didn't take the right angle. Maybe part of that was because Tua was definitely looking towards Waddle on the dig route at first and saw it wasn't open, and so maybe his eyes brought Cisco a little bit too far. But then, yeah, Cisco he got pushed in the back actually by Darby, who was trying to get him to make the tackle, but it still didn't work out. And so, like you said, the big difference was just not being able to bring the ball carrier to the ground. Was there anything in particular you saw on that 39-yard screen from Achain, or was it a matter of kind of like not fitting the blocks the right way and just not, again, bringing the tackler or ball carrier to the ground?
Well, I had a hard time the last couple of years with the Jaguars, because teaching screen coverage is one of the most important things you can do as a defense. In other words, when you set up your training camp, there's certain things like bunch routes where there's three guys together. How are you going to play that? There's a couple of different ways you can do it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, a screen pass is nothing more than a wide sweep. So it's still a gap control situation, meaning that you have to have a contained man on whoever's blocking the outside guy. You have to contain the football.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have to have somebody split the next two blocks, okay? Because that's a gap in there.
Right.
And then you have to have pursuit from the inside. Well, and that particular, when I watched the game, it's hard to kind of tell. But when I watched the 22, where you see the whole field on ESPN Plus,
mm-hmm.
they actually fit the screen pretty good. Okay, they did what they were supposed to do on the screen, which is a positive going forward. But when he made the cut inside, there was a dive, I think, by 95, Harris,
mm-hmm.
that just missed the tackle, and he was able to accelerate because it becomes one-on-one play out there. It's not like you got a lot of pursuit. It's one or two guys in pursuit and everybody else fitting the thing correctly in the gaps. And if that pursuit doesn't get them, there is still a gap in there. And unfortunately, it can be a big play for you.
For sure. Before we get to the offensive side of the ball, was there any individual player performances that stood out in a good or a bad way? To me, Antonio Johnson is a guy who stood out kind of in both regards, where it was almost like Christian Kirk, because Antonio Johnson missed a few key tackles in space. But at the same time, he was kind of playing with his hair on fire, I thought. And it was at least a good sign that he was getting to those spots in the first place, kind of like Kirk, where even if he had a few critical drops, like at least the silver lining was kind of that he was getting open and was in position to make the catch, even if he didn't finish the play. So was there anything else that stuck out to you?
Well, Antonio Johnson, first of all, he's a young guy. There's going to be a few mistakes here and there. The one thing about first ball games especially, but with this new system in the NFL of not having a lot of time with the pads on, tackling is a technique and a want to and a understanding of how to approach tackles. And he was just over aggressive on a number of them. And to me, that's part of being a young player and figuring out. There was one later where they threw a wide, it wasn't a screen, it was just a flare.
Right.
And he came up and got under control and then made the tackle. The ones that he missed, he was out of control. He was just, trying to make a big hit. And that's the one thing that, as a football coach, you like guys that have that aggressiveness, and he has that. But he's a good enough athlete that he can make tackles in the open field. He just has to mentally get himself in the right place and be in the right position to make those kind of tackles. And all that is part of practice, making sure even though you can't bring him to the ground, it's putting him in situations where he can, understand that back has got a lot of area to move and shake, is getting yourself into the right position and being under control in those situations.
Well, to move it to the offensive side of the ball, I thought another player who was playing a little bit too aggressive was Travis Etienne, and that's not even including his game-changing red zone fumble, where I think that play, which is obviously devastating, seemed almost like you kind of have to tip your hat to the defense because of how good of a form Javon Holland had on that punch-out. But then there was multiple times, especially in the first half, where Etienne was just kind of like, in my eyes, trying to just go full steam ahead right when he got the ball on a handoff, rather than kind of pacing himself and letting blocks set up in front of him. So I thought the offensive line blocked a little bit better for Bigsby, and that was part of the reason that Bigsby had a more productive day on the ground. But then when I went back and watched the All-22, I thought that there was a few different times that Etienne might have left some extra yards available. And same goes for Bigsby, honestly. I think both of them had several runs where just with a little bit better vision, they might have been able to eke out a few more yards. And so what did you see from Jacksonville's running game specifically on Sunday?
Well, first of all, I think they had a great day running the football. You have to give the offensive line some credit because they did block very well right up until the last couple drives in the running game. But, I agree with you. I think, to be honest with you, some people might get mad at me, but I think Bigsby actually has more patient and better eyes in some situations than Etienne does. If you were just looking at those guys and you said, okay, what are the real strengths of those two guys? I would say Bigsby might be a better first and second down runner, and Etienne might be the best third down back you could have because he's got great acceleration and he can catch the ball out of the backfield just like a wide receiver. So I really agree with you. I think he has to be a little bit more patient and be able to see a little better on a lot of those inside type runs. So to me, I think we've got a good combination of running backs as long as we're doing what we're doing in the run game with the guys up front. To give you an example, on the 4th down and 1 play, let me first say that I wasn't 100% excited about going for that 4th down play in that part of the field at that time. But there is some analytical and also gut feeling of, are we starting to wear down on defense? We need to stay on the field. But at that particular point in the game, the defense was still playing well. So I'm not really excited about that decision. But I'm not upset with the call because that play would have been a first down if Cam Robinson had even touched the defensive end. But he whiffed completely. And the defensive end was clean in the hole. They had a double team outside. Etienne would have been able to cut inside that block and would have been able to accelerate. but there was a guy sitting in the hole because of the miss by the tackle. So there's a lot of reasons that didn't work. It could have been a big play, in my opinion, that maybe turned the momentum back on. Now, you have to give our defense credit because they bowed up and sudden change, and that play didn't hurt, except field position and just time.
For sure. I wanted to ask you about like the running game scheme specifically too, because I kind of expected the Jaguars to major a little bit more in outside zone this season, because it feels like the past 2 years they've been trying to do a little bit of everything and trying a lot of new things, but it almost feels like they've been too diverse for their own good. And Press Taylor talked a bit this offseason about wanting to try to simplify the running game and wanting to major in one thing. But then they ended up having a pretty diverse run game again, and definitely a lot of gap concepts as well. And like it felt like they didn't really run the same thing twice. And so, like, what did you think about the run game scheme? And do you think it's too diverse, or do you like just like all the different ways that Doug Peterson kind of like uses his blockers in space to attack the defense?
Well, I think it's a good attack. I mean, I have no concerns with the running game in that ball game other than a few missed blocks. They had one situation where Harrison, the guy jumped inside on him. He didn't cut him off. I mean, you're not going to hit big runs all the time, but there were enough big runs in that game to where you say, okay, those are big plays. We're changing the situation. The only thing I had a problem with as far as, the decision-making on some of those is we did not do very well on second down. We did very well running the ball on first down and then play action and off of it, because some of our plays were off play action to during the course of the early part of the game.
Yeah.
But second down, we left ourselves way too many third down and longs. And, we were 2 of 10 on third down, and a lot of it was based on, number one, the defense be able to crank it up and put the pressure on the quarterback, and, not, having to hold the football to get the ball down the field, because we didn't do very well on second down to get us into those third down and 2, 3, and 4s.
Mm-hmm. Did you see anything either on Sunday or on the All-22 in terms of just what happened after halftime? Because as Doug said after the game, it was kind of a tale of two halves, and I felt like the energy kind of got sucked out of the Jaguars' sideline, especially after Etienne's touchdown. And so did you notice anything like from a scheme perspective, or in terms of like, did you think the Jags ran the ball a little bit too much, or just what do you think was a difference in halves?
Well, first of all, I'm going to say that momentum is real.
Yeah.
And the crowd and the Dolphins really got a burst of energy after the fumble and then Tyreek hitting the 80-yard play. So how do you handle adversity? That's more a concern to me, because I think it's a combination of the coaches and the players. You don't want to have it be a trend that when the game's on the line, you can't finish. And we had an opportunity in the second half. Remember, they had a long drive in the second half. The Etienne fumble was in the second half. It was after that combination of things where all of a sudden we missed a few blocks. We got 2 sacks, in the passing game, which was a combination of a number of things that we can talk about. But the momentum changed, and we were able to get it back. Now, that's got to be the leaders of the football team and the coaching staff, not so much the head coach, but the assistant coaches that are talking to those guys in their individual groups that, hey, guys, we got to kick it up now. This is, they're on a high over there. Let's not be fooled that we're just going to go out there and do the same thing that we've been doing, in the first half. We've now got to kick it up a notch, and we got to make sure we're 100% sure of what we're doing when we go forward.
So point it going forward, what would you say like your panic level is entering week 2 against the Browns? Are you pretty worried about this football team, especially considering the way that they ended the 2023 season? Or do you think we need to kind of settle our horses a little bit and let the next few games play out, since it is a week-to-week league?
Well, the only thing I have a concern about is that if you would ask me, Gus, before the game, which team do we have the best chance of being really efficient against? I would have said the Miami Dolphins rather than the Cleveland Browns, even though they got boat raced this weekend by the Cowboys, which has a pretty good defensive football team.
Absolutely.
Okay? But the difference to me would have been that the Miami Dolphins are, in my opinion, a finesse speed team. And I think athletically, we are every bit as finesse and maybe not quite as speed. I might give an edge to Miami, but we've got speed, we've got athletic ability with this roster. Now, Cleveland will punch you in the mouth, especially defensively. Okay, now they're not as strong offensively because of not having Chubb. That's a factor because he's one of those downhill hit it, situations, and their offensive line is not the best in the league. It's not the worst in the league, but it's not the best. But the AFC North is a physical, punch in the mouth type football team, and I don't think our team is built on that. So that's the concern more than what happened in this game. Because if we're a good football team, you shake off that. And now it comes down to how do I play against you? That's what happens. And so for me, I think we can win the football game. I think we're every bit as good a football team as they are, maybe better than they are. But it's that physicality that's going to be interesting to see going into this game.
For sure. All right, Coach, thank you so much for coming on. You can catch Coach Campo on various 1010XL platforms. He co-hosts the Campo and Joe podcast with Joe Cowart. He goes on Hacker After Dark on Mondays for a segment. He's a regular guest on XL Primetime, which he's going on later today. So, Coach, hopefully I'll have you back on very soon. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, and enjoy the fifth quarter because I'm also on the fifth quarter.
The fifth quarter, right. I knew I was
Leon Searcy.
Yeah, with Leon Searcy and Ryan Hacker Green. So, Coach, thanks again. We'll talk to you soon.
You got it. Thanks, Gus. Thanks for having me on.
Of course.
And go Jags.
Go Jags. All right. That was amazing. Been working at 1010XL for a little bit over a year now. And the whole time I was just looking forward to talking ball on a show with Coach Campo. So, yeah, that was fun. Now let's go to our next segment, which is Top Quotes. First, we're going to hear from Doug Peterson after the game against the Dolphins, talking a little bit about just how the game went. This video is via Jaguars YouTube.
Yeah, I mean, it takes a little wind out, but guys battled. I mean, the defense stepped up and made some stops, and it was just kind of a tale of two halves, really. We made plays in the first half. They made plays in the second half. So credit them.
Next up is the video of Trevor Lawrence after the game, also via Jaguars YouTube.
In the second half, you kind of touched on some things, but what did you see out there? What happened on the offense?
Yeah, just some untimely errors. A couple early on, the first couple drives, I don't know if we had 2 or 3 and outs, but we started off really slow and just getting behind the chains early, whether it was a penalty or a stuffed run or an incompletion on first down. They were all kind of something different, but just didn't seem to get the drives going. And then in those second and longs, we didn't get anything positive in those either. So then you're in third and long, and that's going to happen occasionally, and you got to convert, but you can't rely on doing that time and time again. Defenses in this league are too good, and you got to stay ahead of the chains, and we didn't do that early. And then when we put a good drive together, it seemed like we were rolling, great tempo. And then same thing, we had the turnover, and then after that, it went right back to just kind of, stagnant. Weren't able to move the ball, and we got to be able to put drives together consistently like we did in the first half. So we'll have to look at it and see exactly what it was. I don't have all the answers right now, but I definitely know that we had our opportunities and really just didn't take advantage of them.
These next 3 videos you can view on 1010XL Jaguars YouTube page. First one is Travis Etienne's reaction post-game.
One loss turned into another loss. What's the message kind of going forward with the turn?
Just flush this one, I mean, whether you win or lose, you want to go look at the film, you want to be pissed off. And I feel like each and every week we got to have a mindset of get 1-0. And I feel like we just have to just flush it, be critical of what happened on film. And next week, tackle a different mindset. It's a whole new week. NFL is just 1 week at a time. We can't let this carry on the next week because it's not going to let us be our best self. We have to flush this and have to get better and be better from our teammates.
Next up is center Mitch Morse post-game.
In the first and then none in the second. Is that something they adjust to, or you just don't do as well?
I think it's both, right? Like I thought they came out in the second half and made some good in-game adjustments, and then kind of like how we started the first quarter, we just started with 3 and out. And that puts a lot of stress on the defense, and I thought the defense played a really good game against a hell of an offense, and we have to do more. And that's the frustrating thing. So we'll come out and see what it is. I don't know if it's so much of a mindset thing or as it is just a schematics thing, but it feels pretty crummy to put our defense in that position when they play such a good game.
I don't have the exact numbers, but Miami absolutely outsnapped and had a longer time of possession than the Jaguars in the second half. And so, yeah, I think it's just worth noting how tired the Jaguars defense was, partly because the Jags had so many 3 and outs and wasn't really able to stay on the field consistently. Next up is Jarian Jones post-game.
Game in the NFL. You're on Tyreek Hill. They're coming after you early. Emotions for you on those first few opening drives?
I would say I was pretty level-headed. I respect the game. I respect who's in the game, and I respect him, but I definitely respect me a little bit more, So he's a good player, but I also feel like I'm a good player. I just feel like I was executing and doing my job.
He's a good player, but I'm also a good player. Just thought that was a good quote. Next up, we got a Monday morning reaction from Tony, Mike, and David Garrard on Jaguars Today. It's a little tirade or rant or whatever you want to call it from Tony that I thought was well said.
Like, we know the moment where it turned, but it's still hard for me today to blame Etienne. It's such a great defensive play. I blame everyone for just going, meh.
Yeah.
Like, when that play happened, like, there was no energy left on the sideline. I don't know how a team that had it was like watching the 2023 season happen in a day. That's what yesterday felt like for the Jacksonville Jaguars.
All right, and last video we got is just Doug Peterson talking about a key injury to Tyson Campbell, who aggravated a hamstring on Sunday. This is from Monday via Jaguars.
Yeah, he's gonna miss some time. I'm not gonna put him in a box that way. I'm not gonna put any expectations on it. We're just gonna let him go, week to week and see where he comes.
One other thing I want to note is that Browns tight end David Njoku sustained a high ankle sprain in week 1 for the Browns, and so he is week to week and very doubtful to play on Sunday. He made his first career Pro Bowl last year, and so that is definitely a notable injury for the Browns. They've also had both of their offensive tackles banged up, and so even though it's disappointing that Tyson Campbell is likely to miss week 2, at least the Cleveland Browns are as banged up, if not more so. Got a couple more quotes before we get to chat therapy. First is from John Osher in his daily Ozone mailbag on Jaguars.com. Just thought this was a good quote. 6 losses in 7 games feels like a trend, and it is a trend if you believe the Jaguars are the same team that finished last season. Jaguars players do not believe they're the same team as the one that finished last season. It doesn't feel from this perspective that they're the same team that finished last season. The Jaguars must now prove that they're not the same team that finished last season. Otherwise, they're going to be the same team that finished last season. John just really has a way with words, and I just thought that was funny, so I threw it in here. Next quote is from Ben Solak, rising NFL media superstar who recently took a gig at ESPN. in his first Week 1 column titled NFL Week 1 Solak's Quarterback Panic Meter Predictions and Key Stats, Ben Solak he has a little section in the article called Next Ben Stats instead of Next Gen Stats. And so one stat that he had about the Jaguars was, in quote, 0.23. That's Trevor Lawrence's expected points added per dropback in the first half against the Dolphins. It would have been the third best in the league over the full game. Second half, minus 0.10 EPA per dropback. No quarterback was worse over a full game. Why is this so interesting? Because Jaguars coach Doug Peterson will not reveal to reporters how the play calling is divided for the Jaguars' offense between himself and offensive coordinator Press Taylor, on whom many of Jacksonville's offensive woes have been blamed. In 2023, Taylor called all the plays, but in 2022, it was divided. Peterson had the first half, and Taylor had the second. Food for thought. Next quote we got is just a tweet from Tom Pelissero of NFL Network, who said, "Reunion, the Steelers are signing safety Terrell Edmonds off the Jaguars practice squad, per sources." So Edmonds had a pretty impressive offseason as a veteran free agent signee for the Jaguars, and he was expected to maybe have an even bigger role rather than just a reserve and special teamer after Andrew Dewey Wingard sustained a significant injury that'll at least keep him out for the first few weeks of the season. But Edmonds was claimed or scooped up by the Steelers, which I believe is the team he was drafted by originally in the first round, but fact check me on that one. And so, yeah, just a little roster move to note. And then to finish off, we've just got a few stats that I thought were interesting. Football Outsiders tweeted that according to Fantasy Points data, the Jacksonville Jaguars ran the highest rate of man coverage in Week 1 of any team, and it was astonishingly high. Jacksonville ran man coverage at a 73% clip, and the next highest team ran man coverage at a 46% clip. I believe that Football Insights also tweeted that about 50% of that man coverage was cover one man, so with one safety over the top, and about 25% of it was cover two man, so with two safeties over the top. So it's just an interesting trend to note for Ryan Nielsen's defense, how much man coverage they played, even against a dangerous offense like the Dolphins. The 33rd team tweeted that the Jaguars had a 92.3% chance to win the game with 2 minutes to go in the third quarter. So obviously things were looking up going into that Travis Etienne red zone carry, and everything just kind of collapsed after that. But 92.3% is technically Jacksonville's win percentage based on the analytics. 2 more stats for you before we get to therapy. The 33rd team also tweeted that Brian Thomas Jr. had the highest EPA per route of any rookie wide receiver in Week 1 since 2013, which is the first year that EPA data was available. And so Brian Thomas had generated 0.3 EPA per route in his NFL debut. And the next players on the list are A.J. Brown, Jamar Chase, Cooper Kupp, and Terry McLaurin. So definitely good company that Brian Thomas is keeping with his first start. Lastly, Daniel Griffiths, who is one of the must-follows of Jaguars Twitter, great with stats and analysis, just analytical information. He tweeted, according to ESPN Analytics, Trayon Walker's 54% run stop win rate led all edge players in Week 1. Walker also saw the highest double team rate among any of the top 10 players at 46%. So similar to Brian Thomas, and as we kind of mentioned in the trivia section, definitely a very encouraging start to the season by Trayon Walker. So let's get to some chat therapy. Robert Lamison has a question. He said, how come Doug doesn't use Brenton Strange as a fullback in short yard situations? I think part of the reason is that Brenton Strange, we've seen carry the ball like maybe 5 times in his NFL career, and it's all been as a pass catcher, just carrying the ball after the catch. And so I think it's like I don't know if I would trust Brenton Strange with a critical short yardage carry necessarily. I think it makes sense to give it to someone who's really more of a ball carrier like Tank Bigsby, who did receive at least 1, if not 2, kind of fullback dives for the Jaguars. The one kind of negative thing about that, though, is that when the running back lines up in that fullback position, it kind of alerts the defense. Like you could see David Long on Tank Bigsby's unsuccessful fullback dive in the second half, kind of like pointing out when Bigsby lined up in the fullback position. And so Evan Engram has also lined up at fullback in a couple of different kind of offensive sets for the Jaguars. But again, like I don't think it really makes sense to trust a tight end to carry the ball on a fullback dive. And so even if a running back like Tank Bigsby is kind of giving a tell to the defense a little bit, I think it makes more sense to give it to him. But perhaps it makes the most sense just not to use a fullback, or at least to use a fullback by trade. Jonathan Way said, Jaguars, learn how to finish a game. To fix a problem next week, play Brown. All right, thanks for the comment, Jonathan. Abdullah Jabir said, they took out lunch money, period, as in our lunch money, I suppose. Yeah, I thought it was interesting what Campo said about the Dolphins being obviously kind of like the finesse or speed team, and the Jaguars having that too. But at the same time, general manager Trent Baalke's vision is definitely to be a big, like sizable football team with a lot of physicality. And so I think obviously it would be nice to have both power and speed at your arsenal for just across the whole roster and the whole depth chart. But I kind of see, at least, again, Baalke's vision is that he wants the team to be strong and physical and aggressive. He wants his team to be the one that takes other teams' lunch money and punches other teams in the mouth. And so it would definitely be an interesting matchup this week in week 2 between just physical and very good defense in the Cleveland Browns. 100 miles per hour asked, how hot do you think Doug's seat is getting? I think it's probably not any hotter right now than it is a week ago at this time, honestly. But I said in Midnight Mailbag, which you can read on 1010xl.com/Jaguars, there was a lot of questions from people about just Doug Peterson and how hot his seat is getting and how much pressure is on him. And I was saying there that I think we need to kind of give it a game or 3, especially because I know the Jaguars have played a lot of their guys, a lot of their starters in the preseason, but week 1 of the NFL season in recent years has almost turned into like the last week of preseason because so many teams just aren't getting their starters a lot of time to play in the new preseason games. And so essentially, like, games are pretty sloppy across the board. And so obviously that's not an excuse for the Jaguars letting the week 1 game slip away kind of out of their grasp. But I think, like, it is week 1. Let's give it a couple more weeks. I think if the Jaguars are returning from their London trip, which is weeks 5 and 6, I believe, and they still have a losing record and their offensive production is still underwhelming relative to the rest of the NFL's offenses, then Doug's seat will be getting very hot at that point. But I think even though it is a fair question, I think we should just settle down a little bit and wait for another couple of games to see what's happening. 100 miles per hour did add, I would say it's above lukewarm. 100 miles per hour also commented, I expect to see Buster on Sunday, but I'll just start Jarian. What's there to lose? I think it's going to be a little bit of both, where last year we saw when Tyson Campbell went out with his hamstring injury, he was replaced in full by Monteric Buster Brown. And Buster held up pretty well as you would hope from a former, I think he was a 7th round pick in 2021 or something like that. And so he's a definitely young and inexperienced player without a ton of kind of draft pedigree. And so he played about as well as you could have hoped from that type of profile of backup last season. And then against Miami, once Tyson went out, it was kind of a big difference in not just the passing game, but also the running game, because Tyson really is able to set an edge on the perimeter and is a plus run defender for sure, and just a plus tackler. And so I think it's going to be a little bit of a mix between Buster and Jarian on Sunday against the Browns. But I think Jarian especially had a pretty impressive day. It was his NFL rookie debut on Sunday against the Dolphins. And so hopefully he'll be able to continue stacking good performances, especially with Campbell out. For Eva commented, the only right answer is to start Buster. To me, he's been against top receivers already. Yeah, I think that's fair to consider just his experience, having been being a 2nd or 3rd year pro, as opposed to Jarian Jones having just played his first NFL games. And so maybe the Jaguars will go in that direction at first and kind of favor the seniority and the more experienced player in Buster. But to me, I think Jardian did enough on the film in just his first game in the NFL alone that if the Jags had him playing more snaps, I wouldn't balk at it. 100 miles per hour asked, do you think we see any moves for a player at corner or offensive line if things don't start improving? I feel like this office needs to win now. If a trade or a signing or something does happen, then I don't think it would be until the trade deadline. I mean, maybe we see some kind of like low-key signing similar to the Steelers getting Terrell Edmonds off of Jacksonville's practice squad. Something like that maybe could happen in the next couple of weeks, but that's really just going to bolster the team's depth. In terms of like a trade or like something that could actually improve the starting group on either side of the ball for the Jaguars, I don't think we would see a trade happen until the trade deadline. Yeah, and I guess offensive line would probably make the most sense as a position to target. I mean, corner certainly makes sense too, especially if Campbell is out for an extended amount of time. But because they have put so many resources into both of those positions already, like I feel like they feel comfortable with the current groups that they have. And so if anything, like kind of like you're suggesting 100 miles per hour, if Tyson is out for an extended time or if there is like a different significant injury, then that's the point where I would expect or think that maybe a move could happen. 100 miles per hour also said this team screams 9-8 to me. I don't know why. Well, maybe it's because they finished 9-8 each of the past 2 seasons. Gus, you think you can beat Trayvon in arm wrestling? I think a better way to phrase it is, would I last more than a half second against Trayvon in arm wrestling? If we were playing something silly like ping pong or, I don't know, something that actually doesn't consider just his freak athleticism, like if we were playing in a video game, maybe I could beat him at that. But for arm wrestling, nah, I think Trayvon's got me there. For Eva asked if we were going to if we're going to pick anyone up to replace Edmonds. There's no reason you should have been on the practice squad. I mean, I don't know. I thought, again, that he had a pretty solid offseason, but I wasn't necessarily surprised one way or another to see that he didn't make the 53-man roster. And I don't know. I think if someone is – I guess I expect the Jaguars to make a corresponding move and add someone to the practice squad now that someone's been taken off of theirs, but I don't think it's necessarily set in stone that that new player is going to be a safety to replace Terrell Edmonds directly. They're going to add a new player, but it's just going to be based on A, how they feel about the roster, but then B, just who else is out there. Because if there's not really any other worthwhile safeties that are out there, they're not going to bring them in. 100 miles per hour said the silver lining is BTJ seems to be pretty good. Absolutely. I thought him and Gabe Davis had pretty good starts for the offense, and it was kind of a weird performance by the Jags, or a weird day by the Jags, because Tank Bigsby, Brian Thomas, and Gabe Davis all had like big days off the jump where that was kind of a pleasant surprise. But on the other hand, it was really disappointing for Christian Kirk to have his 2 drops, for Travis Etienne to have his red zone fumble, for Evan Engram to not really be as involved as a lot of people are expecting. And so I don't think the Jags were necessarily trying too hard to get like some of these like newer and fresher players involved. But yeah, it is just kind of funny looking back on it, just who did well and who did not in terms of the Jaguars' offensive skill players. 100 miles per hour asked, will the Jaguars be able to afford Trayon Walker if he goes and gets 12 sacks this year? Yeah. I mean, I know that Jacksonville just signed 2.5 really big contracts. I mean, Trevor Lawrence and Josh Hines-Allen are 2 massive deals that got done in the offseason, and then Tyson Campbell also got a new deal, and that's pretty sizable as well. I gave him 1/2, so 2.5 really big contracts, but really 3 big contracts during the offseason. And then even adding Eric Armstead and a couple other free agency moves. But even with all of that said, I don't think the Jaguars are really constrained at all by their cap space, and certainly not to the point where they wouldn't be able to afford Trayon Walker, even if he won Defensive Player of the Year, which I would be extremely surprised if that happens. I shouldn't even put that out in the universe, because I don't want to kind of sway expectations too high for Jaguars fans. But yeah, long story short, if Trayon gets 12 plus sacks this year, I think the Jaguars will still be able to retain him especially because he's obviously very much a bulky guy and was a bulky pick in the draft. And so I think if he performs well enough to kind of deserve a second contract, which is trending in that direction, I expect the Jaguars to give him that second contract. Jonathan said, Jaguars to fix problem, blow lead, ? I don't even know. For Eva said, do you think we should add a little more movement on running downs, motions, pulling, etc.? Well, there was a lot of pulling, and I mentioned this with Campo a little bit earlier. Like Peterson now has kind of like a full arsenal with the offensive line where all 5 starters are able to kind of like be pulled out in space, whether it's gap concepts and you're using 2 pullers, or you're doing a fake pull, or you're doing wham or trap. Like there's a lot available for the Jaguars to do because they have so many athletes on the offensive line who are able to block in space. And so I think there's already plenty of pulling, but I think you do make a good point forever in like the lack of motions, because the Jaguars don't run motion at like one of the lowest rates in the league. But I don't know. I think Doug and the offensive staff is a little bit better at kind of using motions to set up receivers and to kind of disrupt rules for the defense. And so like normally I talked about this on Thursday's show with Mia too. Normally with motion, like just the benefit of it is being able to freeze defenders and make them have to think for a split second because there's an offensive player moving before the snap. But the way that Doug is really good at using it, and what kind of he learned this from Andy Reid because he's the master at this, is using motion to just create binds for coverage defenders specifically. Coach Campo was talking about like how teams defend out of trips coverage and bunches coverage and even twins coverage and just kind of bunch alignments in different ways. And so like it's really beneficial to like for Christian Kirk to either motion out of a bunch set, but even more so to motion into a bunch set, because you'll have defenders kind of being like, oh, okay, like someone's moving, I got to think on my feet real quick. But then also when Kirk is lined up on like the inside versus the outside of another receiver, it could change the coverage rules for like the defense of whether a coverage defender is taking just the guy who's lined up against no matter what, or if he's going to take the guy who goes inside on a route no matter what. So there's just a lot that goes on just in like how defenses cover bunch formations. And so again, I think Peterson is really good at using motion to his benefit on passing plays, but I think they could get a little bit better at using it to their benefit on running plays. 100 mile per hour asked, at what point should Strange start getting more snaps? When he proves he deserves it. I mean, I don't think he like had any big mistakes or anything that showed that he doesn't deserve it. But at the same time, like I don't think he's necessarily shown anything that says he should be getting a lot more snaps and opportunities than Luke Barrell at this stage. And so tight end is one of those positions that there's really a steep learning curve. Once players get into the league, it's really, really rare for tight ends to have immediate production at that position in their first year. And so players like Sam Laporta and Kyle Pitts and even like Don Kincaid are kind of rarities and just not the norm for that. And so I would just stress that even if it's disappointing that Strange is still the number 3 tight end on the team right now, just try to stay a little bit patient because he is still just a second-year player. 100 miles per hour. Appreciate all your comments, my guy. I like your profile picture too. Or my woman. That's terrible. But you said, I forgot Mason Smith looks good. That was definitely something that I took away from the game too. When I asked Coach about just players that stood out, I was almost hoping that he was going to talk about Mason Smith because I think he's a guy that needs to get more consistent. And Mason has said that himself throughout the offseason. Like when reporters ask him just kind of like, what's next or what are you focusing on? He definitely, consistency is his first answer. But man, the flashes are there. The flashes are great. The flashes are exciting. And so I'm really excited to see how well Mason Smith is able to kind of continue building up his game from week to week. Okay, that's pretty much it. I'm just going to end it there. The next show we're going to do at 9:04 a.m. on Thursday with Mia O'Brien. Again, I've noted this in the past, but we're still trying to figure out exactly what the best time is going to be for noon versus 9:04 a.m. And so Today was noon. We're going to try out 9:04 a.m. to start live with Mia Thursday. I'm hoping that starting next week, next Tuesday, we will definitely have something kind of locked in. But feel free to let us know in the comments or on social media if one time, is better for you than the other. So just tune in next Thursday with me, myself, and Nia O'Brien. Thank you to everyone who tuned in, whether you're here for the live session commenting or catching the show later in podcast form. Appreciate every one of you, and hopefully we'll have some more fun things to talk about, just assuming the Jaguars are able to get their first win on Sunday. But till next time, again, we are presented by Injury Care Centers. Thank you to them for being our sponsor, and thanks again to y'all. See you next time.